Welcome to Success Story, the most useful podcast in the world. I'm your host, Scott D. Clary. The Success Story podcast is brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network. The HubSpot Podcast Network has incredible podcasts like the Gain, Grow, Retain podcast. The podcast is hosted by Jeff Brunsbach and Jay Nathan. Now, Gain, Grow, and Retain is built to inspire SaaS and technology leaders who are facing the day-to-day challenges of scaling. Hosts Jeff and Jay share conversations about growing and scaling subscription businesses with a customer-first approach. If any of these topics sound interesting to you, you're gonna like the podcast. Creating more brand advocates, SaaS as a predominant model for business, customer success at scale, or the challenges of integrating new tools with CSM. Some of these topics pique your interest. You're going to love the podcast. You're going to love Gain, Grow, Retain. Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, Gain, Grow, Retain on the HubSpot Podcast Network. Today, my guest is Shirish Nadkarni. He is the author of From Startup to Exit. Shirish is a serial entrepreneur. He has had an incredible career. I'm going to read through some of the things that he's done. Some of them you definitely know. So he's a pioneer in email technology and online education. He has developed consumer technologies that have been used by tens of millions of users worldwide. He successfully founded 3 companies and achieved exits with 2 publicly held companies. These are some of the accomplishments. He co-founded Live Mocha, the world's largest language learning site with over 15 million registered members. Live Mocha was selected as Time Magazine's top 50 sites in 2010 and won the prestigious English Speaking Union Award presented by Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Live Mocha was acquired by Rosetta Stone. He is the founder of Team On Systems, an innovative developer of wireless email technologies. He successfully negotiated acquisition by Research in Motion, RIM, Blackberry. The Team On technology was the foundation of the Blackberry Internet email, which serviced over 50 million mobile users. He contributed to RIM's early growth in the wireless device market through partnerships with T-Mobile. He launched RIM's first smartphone device, the Blackberry 7100, with a phone form factor. He established MSN as an industry-leading web portal. He was responsible for Microsoft's entry into 2 of the largest application categories in the internet, email and search, successfully negotiated acquisition of Hotmail and partnership with Inktomi Corporation. He reestablished Microsoft as an undisputed market share leader in Windows development tools, and he was responsible for Microsoft's early entry and leadership in PC-based email marketing. He has been working in tech for a long time, to say the least. So we spoke about his career. Candidly, we spoke about all the things that he's done, and then I tried to pull out some lessons from them. So some of the actual lessons that we went into: how to research so that you can establish proper product market fit, how to properly plan your company, plan your steps and your milestones in your company as a founder, so when you do get offers, you understand what you want to do, how you want to be acquired. We spoke about differences and similarities, lessons learned as he transitioned between different companies. We spoke about raising funds. We spoke about finding investors, proper fit investors. We spoke about how to select a VC as a partner. We spoke about how to structure agreements with venture capitals. We spoke about culture. We spoke about target market. We spoke about challenges in entrepreneurship. An absolutely incredible conversation. If you are an entrepreneur, or if you are a techie, or if you just love listening to somebody that has worked through so many different industries as the internet has matured, this is an incredible podcast for you. So let's jump right into it. This is Shirish Nadkarni. He is a serial entrepreneur, but more recently, the author of From Startup to Exit.
All right, great. First of all, Scott, great to be here with you. Thanks for having me on your show. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I'm based here in Seattle, Washington, but I came to the United States in my late teens and did my undergraduate education here in the United States. And then after getting my MBA from Harvard Business School, I joined Microsoft. This was in 1987, right after they had gone IPO. So this was in very early days of Microsoft. They had probably about 1,000 employees. And I was 26 years old, and I was given the responsibility for launching Microsoft's software in the email category. Email today is pretty widespread, and everybody uses email. But at that time, in 1987, only very large companies used email, and they use it on mainframe systems. Hardly anyone had a PC-based email solution. So I was very fortunate to have launched the whole category of email, on the PC and the Apple Macintosh back in 1987. And then I'll talk a little bit more about my history at Microsoft, but I also got to do the Hotmail acquisition at Microsoft, which was a pretty large acquisition at that time, about $400 million. And that became MSN Hotmail and grew to over 300 million users around the world. So that's a little bit about my history, early days. And then I became a tech entrepreneur. I've started 3 companies and had successful exits for 2 of those companies. And that's what prompted me to write my book.
So we'll talk about some of the lessons that you've learned over your career, which I'm pretty sure has formed the basis for what you write about. Now, even walk me through as you left working for somebody, and when I was looking at your resume and your history. You've worked with some of the biggest names. These are iconic brands that you've worked with, including, if I'm not mistaken, the first company you founded, Team On, that was acquired by Blackberry. Yes. So you've worked with you've worked with the biggest names in tech. So, at what point in your career did you pivot and start your first company? Was it after the Microsoft, or was there other things that you did in between?
No, this was after I had done about 12-year stint at Microsoft. So I had amazing experience at Microsoft. I always wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, but in the early days of the PC industry, it was hard to be an entrepreneur because you had to not only produce software, you had to package it into 5.5-inch floppies and create a box, and then find retail distribution like Egghead. You may remember Egghead in those days. So it was not really easy to find customers for your software. But by the late 90s, the internet was in full swing, and you could actually develop applications in the cloud that could be distributed straight to your customers. So it was a lot easier to get started. And I had great experience at Microsoft, working on MSN and launching Hotmail, once we had acquired it. And so I felt that there was a big opportunity to create an email solution which was business or enterprise grade, and provided through the cloud as opposed to installing servers in your company. And so that was the genesis of my first company, Team On Systems, which was a business grade or enterprise grade email and calendaring solution that could be deployed by companies, typically small and medium-sized companies.
And how did you start Team On? So walk me through. Were you were not, or were you a technical co-founder or founder rather?
No, I was a business guy. I had a technical background certainly, but I was it had been a decade since I'd written code, so I had to actually find a technical co-founder, which was pretty challenging. I obviously went to my friends who I knew at Microsoft, but the Microsoft stock was doing incredibly well at that time, and
they didn't want to leave.
They didn't want to leave. They didn't want to lose their health insurance. So finally, I was introduced to my co-founder, Shaibal Roy. He was working in the Bay Area, and he was working on Netscape's email software. So he was the perfect CTO to work with me. But even he was reluctant to leave the company. And so we came to an agreement where he would work part-time, and I would find an outsourcing company to go build the software, and he would manage it. And then he would move to Seattle and join the company full-time once we had raised our initial round of funding. And that's what happened. I raised about 15 million in 1999, and he joined my company, and then we started recruiting people locally for the company.
And some of the lessons that you learned in that first company you founded are things that you speak about in the book. But one of the things that are obviously like a big issue for startups is the fact that 9 out of 10 of them fail, mostly because they don't find proper product market fit. So how did you find that proper product market fit? What was your strategy for that? And also, just a follow-up question, I want you to give some context. Did you raise that money pre-revenue, or did you wait until you found product market fit, you were selling to the market before you raised that 15?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, this was during the crazy days of the dot-com boom. And based on my reputation, having worked for Microsoft, obviously was a big help. I had, we had only developed beta software when I started raising money, and I raised, $15 million in funding on a pre-revenue basis. So we didn't have any revenue at that point, and I raised it on a pre-money valuation of 23 million. So it was totally crazy times at that time to be able to raise that kind of money without really having any kind of revenue or customer traction. But to answer your first question about product market fit, what we discovered, it took us about 6 months to kind of iterate through various versions of our software. We were able to sign up a lot of users, but we didn't really get good retention. And I think that was because people were still uncomfortable, using email in the cloud and relying on some other company to store very sensitive corporate information, which is your, email information. And so it became clear to us that the original idea was not working. And so we decided to pivot our solution to providing mobile access to your existing email. This was the time when Blackberry was getting started. They had about a couple of 100,000 users, and it was a small form, like a pager form factor Blackberry instead of the the smartphone form factor. And at that time, regular phones were becoming internet enabled. And you had something called a web browser on your phone, which, on a very small screen allowed you to access the internet. And so we decided that, hey, why do you need a specialized device like BlackBerry, which can be expensive? Why not enable access to your email on your phone? And that's what we did. We basically reverse engineered all the proprietary email systems like Microsoft Exchange and Lotus Notes and AOL Mail and Hotmail and so forth. And we would allow you to access that email from your phone wherever you are.
Understood. Okay. And so your product, so that's a pretty crazy startup story. So the fact that you raised 15 million pre-revenue, so you were playing with investors' money while still trying to figure out product market fit, and you were iterating. I'm just curious, would you have done it differently if you could redo it? Was that a lot of stress with the 15 million pre-revenue?
It sure was a lot of stress. You have a lot of responsibility to your investors. Yeah, I think I would have done it differently. I would have done a lot more, market research initially to validate whether the idea made, sense at that time. Today, the idea of Team On is something that is widespread. So it was a matter of timing. So the idea was great, but the timing was not right because it took, quite some time for companies to become comfortable with using software on the cloud. And we were one of the first SaaS software introduced into the market at that point. And so whenever you introduce a new concept, it takes time for companies to adopt it. So I wish I'd done a lot more market research to really understand, hey, is this something that is ready, in terms of market acceptance or not?
And what what advice would you have for somebody who, after you've learned and you've gone through this, to find that product market fit or to validate that idea before you take it to market?
Yeah, I talk about that in my book, From Startup to Exit. I've a whole chapter dedicated to achieving product market fit. And so
I
what
know
I
it's not an easy, it's not a quick, easy, it's not a
yeah
quick, easy
yeah
thing.
yeah what I recommend is obviously conduct a lot of customer interviews, and don't even talk about your solution first, or ask the customer, if they like your solution. First understand what are the top 3 or 4 problems that they have in the domain that you're kind of researching. And if your problem that you're addressing is not in the top 3 or 4, then right there you may want to pivot and understand, okay, tell me more about your top 2 or 3 problems, and maybe there is a solution I can build that is more of interest to you. Because if your solution is not addressing a top 3 or 4 problem, then even though they may be addressing a need, it may not be top of mind to customer, and as a result, your sales cycles will be extremely long, because the customer is going to say, I'm going to first address my critical problems, and then I'll get to some other problems that I need to address. And so first, focus on the top 3 or 4 problems. Make sure that your solution tackles that. And the other thing that I recommend is actually testing, even before you build your software, is actually creating a website and using Google SEM or Facebook ads. Drive users to that website and see if you can get customers to register for your solution, because that will tell you, when you actually start marketing your solution, what kind of an uptake are you going to get, and are you going to get enough users, and is it going to cost you, how much is going to cost you to really acquire those users, and can you build a profitable business where your lifetime value for your customer is far greater than the cost of customer acquisition. So those are 2 things I'd highly recommend that people follow in terms of a methodology for achieving product market fit.
I just want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, Peloton. Peloton is pushing you further with so much new on the Peloton Bike and Peloton Bike Plus. New classes, new music, new ways to keep your workouts motivating and exciting. And if you're going to commit to a healthy lifestyle, you have to make it part of your lifestyle. It cannot just be a one-off. So any way to make sure that it's fun and fresh, that's how you stick with it. Now, there's a few new additions for the new year that Peloton is bringing: boxing, new artist series music selections, and more daily workout variety. With their boxing, whether or not you've boxed before or you've never stepped into the ring, you can now discover a fast, fun, and furious boxing workout with Peloton instructors in your corner. They're adding new music. Work out to a single artist for an entire class, or from your favorite hits to the deep cuts. There are over 100 artist series to choose from. Find your favorite music and turn your next workout into a concert. And more daily workout variety. So key. It's easier to stick to your goals when you keep your workouts interesting. Peloton has a workout for every goal, day, and mood. De-stress from a long day with 30 minutes of strength and 20 minutes of cardio, or do a quick 15-minute total body class before work. Stay motivated while having fun with bike workouts, yoga, meditation, dance, cardio, and more. So whatever your goals are, if you're trying to see a better you, a healthier you in 2022, visit onepeloton.com to learn more. That's onepeloton.com, OnePeleton.com. It's very smart. And as Timon grew, walk me through the growth of the company and eventually your decision to sell it, I guess is the best way to put it. So keep walking me down your story.
Yeah. So once we decided to pivot to providing mobile email software, then we started marketing to wireless carriers, because they had to install our software and make it available to their customers. And we got traction with T-Mobile, which is based out of here in Seattle. They were very interested in the solution that we were providing. And then we also started talking to Blackberry because Blackberry at that time was limited in its access to only Microsoft email software, whereas we provided access to a whole range of proprietary email systems. And so as we started discussions on licensing our software to them, they came to the conclusion that this was very strategic for them, and they would be better off acquiring our company. And so in 2002, they made an offer to acquire Teamon, and we decided to, at that point, that given that BlackBerry was becoming quite well known, and because they had existing relationships with wireless carriers around the world, that we could get much wider distribution for our software through BlackBerry as opposed to trying to do it on our own. And this was also a time when the dot-com bust had happened, and so raising money was very, very hard at that point. So the sale to BlackBerry made a lot of sense for the company, and we did extremely well. Our technology became known as BlackBerry Internet Email, and it grew to about 50 million BlackBerry users over time, and so had really widespread usage within the BlackBerry community.
And when you were going through that process, so they were thinking about licensing it, and then the conversation started around whether or not we should just acquire this software. What were some of the things that you were thinking? Because when you build a company, there's different ways to exit, right? You can go for another funding round. You could technically IPO it, or you could just sell it to a company. So why did you? I think you sort of alluded to it because the dot-com bust. It was harder to potentially take it in other directions. Is that the reason why you decided to sell to BlackBerry, or what other considerations should you think about when you're trying to exit a company?
Yeah, that's a great question because a lot of founders have to come to that decision point, at some point, whether they are actively selling their company or whether somebody approaches them for an acquisition. In our case, as I said, funding was very difficult to raise. We did have actually an offer from our existing investors to continue to fund the company. But the terms were not very attractive for us because valuations had come down significantly at that point because of the dot-com bust. And the second consideration was the fact that BlackBerry had relationships with all the major carriers around the world. And so, we would have been much more successful getting distribution for our software through BlackBerry than trying to do it on our own. And that ultimately worked out, for us because, as I said, our technology reached about 50 million BlackBerry users, within a few years, and was critical. And it was also critical for BlackBerry because they were able to not only reach large enterprises but also small businesses, who could use BlackBerry because of our software.
Were there things that a founder should think about when they're starting to get offers or they're starting to get approached, or even during the life of the company, that can help them get a better valuation when they're exiting? Is there things, the way they structure their revenue or the way they or certain customers they go after, that they should think about?
I would say the best, the couple of things that founders need to consider. Ideally, your company, there's a saying that your company should be bought, not sold. So you want to be in a position where your company is getting offers for acquisition as opposed to you going out there and trying to sell your company. And you should typically look to do an acquisition when the economy is doing really well versus when the economy is doing poorly, because at that time it's very hard to sell your company. So first of all, the economic circumstances should be amenable to helping you sell the company and get the best price. And the second thing that I advise in my book is that you should think about hiring an investment bank that specializes in your vertical, whatever market you're addressing. And they can line up a number of acquirers and create competition between those acquirers and help you get the best price. Because if you have only one acquirer at the table, it's a lot more difficult to get a good price. Then it's either something or nothing, versus a situation where you have two or three acquirers who are competing to acquire your company, and you can get the best price for your company as a result.
Did you work with an investment bank, or is that just a
Yes, I
lesson
did.
that you've
Yes,
learned?
yes,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
we did. Yeah, we once
Okay.
we got interest from BlackBerry, we hired an investment bank to help us with the sale of the company. Yes.
Very smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you sell the company to BlackBerry. Do you work for BlackBerry for a while, or
Yes, I did.
are you out
I
the
did.
door? Okay, you do.
BlackBerry was a great company to work for. I worked there from 2002 to 2006, approximately. And I not only did we integrate the team-on technology with BlackBerry to create something called BlackBerry Internet Email, which, as I said, reached 50 million BlackBerry users over time. But also launched a number of BlackBerry devices through T-Mobile. I, for example, launched the first BlackBerry device that had a phone form factor as opposed to a PDA, form factor, and that was RIM's entry into kind of the traditional phone business as opposed to just a smartphone business. So it was a great time to be at BlackBerry. They were growing very fast, and they were kind of the top device that everybody wanted at that time. And it was known as Crackberry, if you remember, because people were
Yeah,
so
I do.
addicted
That was
to that device. Yeah,
yeah, it had quite a run. It had quite a run.
it had quite a run. Yes, yes. Sad that they got taken over by iPhone and Android, but they had quite a run
Yeah.
for about a decade.
So you eventually finished up at BlackBerry, and then you started another company because
Yes.
you just you couldn't sit around. You couldn't sit around, so you had to start Live Mocha. So
Yes.
walk me through the second entrepreneur story, the second startup story, and how that
Yeah.
came about.
Yeah, it came about, based on two factors. One was, I was traveling in Spain with my family, and we had just landed in Marbella in Spain, and we rented a car from the airport, and it was dark, and we got lost. And we ended up at a gas station, and I stepped out of the car to ask people around me how to get to the hotel. And unfortunately, everybody spoke only Spanish at that time. Things are different today, but this was in 2006 2007 timeframe. So I turned to my kids who had been learning Spanish for a couple of years in middle school, and I said, "Okay, ask them for directions in Spanish." And not surprisingly, they couldn't really speak any word of Spanish, and it became clear to me that the way that kids learn Spanish in high school and middle school is really not the way to learn. And the way to learn a foreign language is by practicing with native speakers. So that was kind of one thing that stuck in my mind. The second thing was, at that time, Rosetta Stone started becoming popular, and they had these kiosks in airports. This was in 2007. Where they were selling their boxed CD-ROM based language learning software. And it struck me that in the day and age, at that time, broadband internet was quite prevalent. That why do you need a piece of CD-ROM software on your PC? Why not just stream it from the internet? And you could create an online learning program that could teach you a foreign language. And so we came up with this concept of social language learning, where everyone was not just a student but also a teacher. So I could be learning Spanish as a native English speaker, and I could help somebody in China learn English, whereas somebody in Mexico could be learning English and teaching me how to speak Spanish. So that was the genesis of Live Mocha, and we were the first of its kind on the internet. And we grew very rapidly to over 15 million users in over 200 countries around the world.
And what was different, or what was the same when you started Live Mocha? Was this another idea that you took to investors pre-revenue, or did you bootstrap it at this point? Because I'm sure you had some cash coming from the past exit. So walk me through the inception.
Yeah, in this case, we had launched Live Mocha, and we got really good press. And the investment community, this was pre the financial crisis. The investment community was investing in startups, and so we were lucky to have raised funding at that point. We raised about $6 million in funding from a local VC firm here in Seattle, and then started, rapidly growing our user base from that point on.
I just want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, Trade Coffee. Now, I'm a coffee lover, and I just found out a really unnerving stat and fact about coffee. 90% of coffee that you buy from a grocery store is actually stale. You heard that right. It blew my mind. The coffee you know and love and you go buy from your grocery store needs an upgrade, and that's not the way coffee is actually supposed to taste. So instead of buying this old same coffee that you're already getting that's stale, Trade Coffee sends you fresh coffee as much as you want, as fast as you drink it. It's going to replenish, but it's always going to be fresh. So Trade sells fresh, roasted, and ethically sourced beans from America's best independent roasters. They ship free to you as often as you like, whole or ground. Whether you're a coffee nerd or you just want a better daily cup, Trade's real coffee experts taste test over 400 roasts and use technology to match you to your ideal coffee based on your preferences and your brewing method. They actually set up a quiz so that you can answer some information and they'll have a better idea of what coffee actually fits your particular profile. And they also guarantee that if you don't love your first bag that they send you, they're going to replace it for free. They've been featured by New York Times, Wired, GQ. They've delivered over 5 million bags of fresh coffee. I'm a huge coffee nerd, and any way I can get better coffee that I regularly enjoy, I'm game for. The subscription is no hassle. You can skip shipments, you can change your frequency, you can cancel anytime you want. And for all Success Story podcast listeners, they set up an intro offer to get you off the ground. They're offering a total of $20 off your first 3 bags when you go to drinktrade.com/success story. But you have to get started. So to start, take their quiz. Figure out what coffee works for you. Go to drinktrade.com/success story. Start your journey to your perfect cup. That's drinktrade.com/success story. Get $20 off your first 3 bags. And one thing you do speak about is that fundraising doesn't just have to be an art. There can be a science to it. So I actually wanted to touch on it during the Live Mocha fundraise versus the Team On fundraise, because I feel like it's unfair. If you're fundraising in a .com boom, people are going to say, well, that was just easy. But you did it twice now, right? So you did the fundraising for a Live Mocha as well, and also raised $6 million.
Yeah.
So when you do raise money, what are some strategies that you can use to pitch VCs? And then I also want to understand a little bit more about the fundraising process and some lessons that you have, because I think that's something that I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs really have a hard time with.
Yeah.
So how do you turn this into a science from an art, from just pitching anybody and crossing your fingers?
Yeah. A critical piece of that fundraising strategy is to really tell a compelling story about what kind of transformation is happening around the world that is going to make your company successful. And in our case, the key transformation that was happening at that time was globalization. Everybody was talking about globalization. They're talking about how jobs were being created in countries like China and India and Brazil. And as a result of that, there was an immense need for people around the world to learn English. So whether you were in China, India, or Brazil, or any country where jobs were being outsourced to, it was critical for people in those countries. If they wanted to get ahead, then learning English was their ticket to success. And so, I kind of painted a picture of 1 billion plus people around the world wanting to learn English, and how the internet would enable us to reach people all around the world without having to sell these, CD-ROM boxes and create distribution for software and all that. All that could be done very easily, through the internet. So that's one of the critical pieces that you have to kind of talk about, and then you have to show, how your solution is really unique and is going to capture the imagination of the potential customers. And then finally, it comes down to the team. I had prior success in having sold Team On to Blackberry, and so that gave me some credibility that I had achieved some level of success, and that I could potentially repeat that again with LimeMocha.
And did you have to reach out to many investors, or did you only have to reach out to a select few? Is it a volume game at any point?
No, it's not a volume game. Typically, you reach out to between 5 or 10 investors, and either you find traction or you don't. At which point you need to kind of, if you really can't get your story across, with 5 to 10 investors, then you need to kind of pull back and say what's going on, what's wrong with my pitch, and really talk to existing investors, other entrepreneurs, and understand what's going on. Is it external factors? Is it your pitch that is not resonating? What's going on that's not? Because you're just going to be otherwise just bang your head on the wall and getting bloody in the process and wasting a lot of time and energy when you could be focusing on building your company.
Agreed. Yeah, no, sometimes I feel like when I speak with founders who are fundraising, it seems like almost a full-time job to do the fundraising, and they can't focus on their company because they're spending so much time looking for money.
Yeah, that's why picking the right time also to pitch your company is very important. So it all again depends on the investment climate, but generally when you have some real traction to show, that's when you should go out and raise your next round of funding.
And the other point that you discuss and you speak about in the book, which I thought is an interesting point, and I agree with this point a lot, is that you have to be careful who you select as a VC partner.
Yes.
Walk me through why that is.
Yeah, I mean, there are, you'll find that there are two categories of VCs out there. There are those who have been prior entrepreneurs, have deep operational work experience, and they know what it takes to build out, a great startup. And those that are, who have MBAs or financial background, but don't really have expertise in, how to build a company. Now, both sets of people are really smart. Generally, you'll find that there are a lot of smart people. But I found better success with the VCs who have prior startup experience, because they really understand, what it takes to build a startup. They're more patient. They have better advice to offer you. They have more connections so that you can leverage those connections to build your company and build partnerships. And find people who can advise you on your startup. So I typically encourage founders to go find VCs who have deep success and deep operational experience to back them up.
And do you when you structure those agreements with the venture partner, is that part of the actual agreement where they may offer some strategy or they may make introductions, or is this sort of like an unspoken handshake agreement just because the experience that they have?
No, it's an unspoken handshake agreement. Typically, what happens is when you get investment from a VC firm, then one or two partners from that firm will join your board. And so by joining a board, they are committing to spend a certain amount of time with your company and advising on your strategy and operational issues. So that's an unspoken agreement. Yes.
Very good. And the last thing that I pulled out from this book that I thought was important was the emphasis on company culture and the importance that plays in growing a startup. And I think that I don't think anyone's going to disagree that having a strong company culture is important, but in a startup environment, why is it even potentially more so?
Yes, it's actually not very common for founders to take the time to create a company culture. And oftentimes the company culture will simply reflect, how the founders, work. So when I was at Microsoft, for example, Bill Gates didn't define a culture and say these are our cultural values. We basically all emulated Bill, and we were super like Bill. We were all super hungry, super aggressive, which served Microsoft well for a long time, but also got Microsoft into trouble with the Justice Department. So I definitely advise founders to take the time to work with the management team to come up with a set of values that they want to promulgate to employees within the company, and take every opportunity to really discuss those values, whether it's new employee orientation, or whether it's company meetings where they highlight certain accomplishments and kind of relate those accomplishments back to their values. Those are the things that are really important. And the reason that the culture is important is because at some point the company is going to outgrow you, and you will not have the opportunity to work with everyone. And so you want to make sure that the culture defines the guardrails and the process by which your employees will make decisions, and how they'll interact with each other, how they'll interact with customers, how they'll interact with partners. And if you want a certain type of behavior, then you need to define that culture and really make sure that your employees understand your values. Amazon is a great example. They have 14 different principles that they've articulated, which are in fact their hiring process. They make sure that they're hiring people based on those principles.
I just want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, HubSpot. Now, you may have heard me speak about leveling up in the past, how we can level up our careers, our businesses, our customer experience. I wanted to take a minute and focus on that last one, because when we level up our customers' experiences, we transform our customers into evangelists and help our business and our careers grow like crazy. With new features dedicated to helping your sales teams improve your customer experience, HubSpot is on a mission to help millions of companies grow better, starting with yours. Conversation intelligence tools help your teams get real-time insights into calls with automatic recording, transcription, and call analysis. With more visibility into customer conversations, coaching, and customer feedback becomes that much easier. Easy share meeting links let customers see availability and book meetings for you, all from the HubSpot platform. This cuts out endless cycles of scheduling email. Learn more about how you can transform your customer experience with a HubSpot CRM platform at HubSpot.com. Very smart. I think that's actually a good point. I mentioned that culture is important, but you're right. I think that's something, when you're a startup founder, you may not see the value in it day one just because you're so distracted with all the other stressors that are going on in your life. But think long term, think longevity. Like, you have to get that right from day one, or that can damage you in the long term for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the example of Uber, Uber was super successful because they were very, very aggressive. Travis Kalanick, who's the founder and CEO for a long time, was very, very aggressive in fighting the taxi industry, but unfortunately, the aggressive culture really created a lot of problems for them, and ultimately, he was fired from his position. And so, you really have to be very careful about how you define your culture and how that changes, over time. Maybe you need to be aggressive initially, but then as you grow your company, the tone of the company, might need to change as well.
And one thing that I just wanted to ask you, because you put this book together, and even as I was reading through it goes through literally every part of building a company, which is like incredibly impressive. Mm-hmm. Who is, here, we'll show it here if somebody's watching, or, it'll be in the show notes as well, but who is this book for? What is the most important thing that you want somebody to take away after they read this book?
Yeah. So the book is is meant for anyone who has an interest in either becoming an entrepreneur or understanding how the startup industry works. So it's designed to be, especially for founders or aspiring founders, it's designed to be a guidebook that you can read from start to finish and understand the whole journey, but also can be a guidebook reference. So, I have a couple of chapters on fundraising and how term sheets are negotiated, what does each term mean, etc. Well, you might forget after you read the book that specific portion, but when you get ready to negotiate your term sheet with the VC partner, you may want to go back to the book and read, okay, what does participating preferred mean, or what does anti-dilution clause mean? All those terms are covered extensively in the book.
Very good. And then I actually forgot to mention, so I'll leave it in the show notes, but the book is called From Startup to Exit. And then this actually brings me to my next point. If people do want to get the book or they want to connect with you, best website, social media, where do you want people to go? You can drop as many handles or websites as you'd like.
Yeah, so the main website I have is shirishnadkarni.com. So that's spelled SHIRISHNADKARNI.com. And you'll find me very active on LinkedIn as Shirish N, SHIRISHN, as well as the same handle on Twitter as well. So I'm very active on those particular channels.
Very good. Okay, so to finish off these interviews, I just like to do a couple rapid fire questions to pull out some insights from your career. So as long or as short as you'd like, whatever is fine with me. So the biggest challenge that you had in your career, what was it, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest challenge was with my first company, with Team On Systems, as we discussed. My initial foray with the product was not successful, and then we had to pivot. And so we were successful in pivoting our company and finding a good solution, which ultimately led to the acquisition by Blackberry.
And I think that's actually a really important point. Like, I think we kind of glossed over the fact that you've mentioned the word pivot a few times. How important is being able to pivot as an entrepreneur?
Oh yeah, it's always has to be at the back of your mind as you're doing testing for product market fit. You need to continually understand your customer pain points. How are they using your software? Are they engaged with your software? Are you retaining your customers? All of these things you have to really understand and have ideas in your back of your mind as to how to take the product forward, whether it's fine tuning it or whether it's a complete pivot. Those are things that you need to be thinking about all the time.
You've probably had a lot of people that have impacted you over the course of your career. If you had to pick one person who had an incredible impact, who was that person and what did they teach you?
I would say my mother was very impactful to me. She always believed in me and encouraged me to do things beyond what I thought my capacity was. So she really pushed me hard and gave me the freedom to, and also encouragement more so to pursue things that I thought were a stretch for me. And that's how I kind of grew over time. And when I wanted to come to the United States, she did not raise any objections. She encouraged me to do that, even though it meant that, we would be separated and not be able to see each other for long periods of time.
If you could recommend a book or a podcast that you've read or consumed lately, what would it be?
For the book, one of my favorite books is called Positioning by, I think the author is Al Ries. And it's an incredibly smart book about how to think about positioning your product in a variety of different ways. And my favorite podcast is How I Built This by Guy Raz.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. One day.
Yeah. I'm trying to get one day you will be on that list. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if you had to tell your 20-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
I would say start sooner. I started my first company when I was, 40 years old, which is not, too old. But I tell young people these days that, as they're especially graduating from college, is that, hey, you have all the freedom in the world, a little amount of risk. Stay in your parents' basement if you need to save money, but go start something or go join a startup because this is the time to do it, and you'll have all the energy and excitement in the world to do it.
What is a big misconception about startups or entrepreneurship?
I would say a big misconception is that you need to work 80, 90 hours a week. Certainly, there are some number of people who do that, but I think you can do a startup and still, I had young kids growing up when I was doing my startups, and I still managed to find time to spend with them, help them with their homework and so forth. I worked long hours, but you don't necessarily need to sacrifice everything to achieve success. It is, I mentioned that to people, that it's a marathon where you need to run fast, but you need to pace yourself. You can't burn yourself out in the first innings because you need to
Yeah,
continue going for a long period of time.
very smart. And last question, what does success mean to you?
Success to me, the thing that I get the most gratification from is getting the message out about whatever you're doing to a large community of people, and delighting them with what you have done. So whether it's a product with Team On or Live Mocha, where we reached 50 million Blackberry users or 15 million Live Mocha users, or my book, I want to get the word out and help people, and delight them and help them in their journey as much as possible.